Welcome everyone to the grants webinar regarding the fiscal year 2023 grants from the Nevada Arts Council. We're also going to be briefly talking about our currently open grants for fiscal year 2022. Okay. I am Sierra. I'm the Grants and Projects Analyst based out of the Carson City office. Krista Ficken is our Grant Program Assistant. She's not here today. Tony?
Hi everyone, Tony Manfredi with the agency. Nice to see you all. Thanks for being here.
And this email, grants@nevadaculture.org, is going to be the best way to contact both myself and Krista. That comes to both of us. So if you have any questions after this presentation or any questions throughout the grant process, grants@nevadaculture.org is going to be the best way to reach us with those questions. Okay. Today, we're going to start with just a very brief overview of our grant program. We're going to talk about eligibility in all of our different, for all of our different grantees. And then we'll get into talking about the specifics of all of our current grant programs and our upcoming grant programs. All of this information is available on our website, including more details such as the guidelines, application questions, resources for grant applicants, and I'll go over how to access all of that as well. And finally, if you would like a copy of this presentation after the webinar today, please shoot me an email at grants@nevadaculture.org, and I can send you this presentation as a PDF for reference. The grant program is funded by both the state of Nevada and the federal government through a partnership grant with the National Endowment for the Arts. So most of our grants are made up of both federal and state funds. We fund nonprofit and community organizations, public institutions, and individual artists. And we'll talk about all of those grantee types in just a moment. This is just a little snapshot of our funding sources, as I said, both state and federal. And this was for fiscal year 2022 and fiscal year 2023. You can see our amounts there down at the bottom. And because most of our grants are made up of a mix of federal and state funds, we do follow all the federal requirements for our sub-grantees. Okay. So these are our three main types of applicants that we're going to talk about: individual artists and teaching artists, nonprofit organizations, both arts and non-arts, and government agencies and public institutions such as libraries, schools, and other state agencies. Okay. Individuals must be at least 21. You must be a current Nevada resident and have been in residence for at least 1 year prior to the grant application. This we do check, so this can be a little bit tricky for some of our applicants. We ask for your photo ID to verify this information, but if your ID or your license was renewed in the past year, then we need additional information to prove your residency for at least 1 year. Usually that's in the form of a utility bill, a lease, things like that. And that'll be requested in that application. You must be a US citizen or legal permanent resident. You can't be enrolled as a degree-seeking student, and that does include master's degrees. And of course, current staff or board members are not eligible. Nonprofit organizations. You must be tax exempt under Section 501c3 of the Internal Revenue Code. Fiscal agents are not accepted in most grant categories in both fiscal year 2022 and in fiscal year 2023. So you must have that 501c3 status. You must be actively incorporated with the Nevada Secretary of State's office and in good standing. This third one we're going to talk about a lot more in depth in just a moment, but if you currently are here from a nonprofit organization or from a public institution, you likely already have a DUNS number. This number is being replaced as of April 4th of this year with a new unique entity ID. That's what UEI stands for. It's a unique entity ID number, and that's from sam.gov. That's all I'm going to say on that for now. We'll talk about that much more in depth in a moment, because that is a big change, and it is affecting everyone throughout the country, as this is a federal change. Finally, we do fund organizations in border states if they are incorporated in Nevada with 501c3 status, and those projects have to clearly demonstrate that they're serving Nevada residents. Okay. Public institutions. Our three main types for this are government agencies that can be municipal, state, colleges and universities, and public schools and libraries. There's a couple different rules that apply to each of these. For instance, colleges and universities, each academic department can apply separately, but they can receive no more than one per fiscal year. Public schools and libraries can apply independently as long as they have their own budget and facility. And again, this UEI number applies to these entities as well. So let's jump right into that. So as I said before, the federal government is transitioning from using that DUNS number to using the unique entity ID. The main reason for this is that Dun & Bradstreet issued those DUNS numbers. That's an external company. And now they're moving it all under SAM, which stands for the System for Award Management. That is a federal website. Now the federal government will be issuing these numbers. Again, these are no cost. It's free to get this. It's just a transition. It can all be done online. It's fairly easy to do. But you must do this and get a SAM UEI number before you apply for any Nevada Arts Council grants from this point on. We have a lot of really great resources on our website in the resources for grant applicants page, which includes all of this information plus a step-by-step guide and a video that the federal government put out that walks you through this step-by-step. So you are likely in one of these three categories. If you have a DUNS number and you are already registered in SAM.gov, then you have already been assigned this UEI number, which is great. All you have to do is go into your SAM.gov account and your DUNS number is listed, and right underneath that, your new UEI number is listed. So you've already got one. Likely, if you have not received direct federal funds, you're probably not registered in SAM.gov, as that is not a requirement. So most of you probably fall into this category number 2, where you have a DUNS number, but you're not registered in SAM.gov. What they have done, so you don't need to do the full entity registration in SAM.gov if you are only receiving funds from a pass-through agency like ours. So in that case, it is a shorter application. It doesn't take long. I've seen the process. It's fairly user-friendly. So you'll go into SAM.gov. And again, we have a really great guide on our website for this that'll take you through step by step. If you don't have a DUNS number yet, and it's before April 4th, unfortunately, you'll have to go to Dun & Bradstreet website first to get a DUNS number, and then go to sam.gov to get your UEI. So that's a little bit confusing. If you are in that category number 3, feel free to reach out. And really, with any questions on this, this is something that every state arts agency is dealing with, and every nonprofit who receives pass-through funds from the federal government is dealing with this right now too. So this is a huge nationwide change. The grants team, myself and Krista, are available to help to answer any questions, to get everyone up to speed and through this transition process. And finally, as a friendly reminder, it is free. We are seeing reports of scammers trying to email organizations that they need to pay to get this. So if you get one of those, please delete that email. This is a free process. Oh, great. And Tony put a link to the resources for grant applicants page on our website, where you can find all of this information and more. Okay. It's just a brief overview of the requirements once you are awarded a grant from the Nevada Arts Council. You're going to get a grant award packet. That packet has everything you need in it for the entire life cycle of the grant, including all of your requirements, information about your final report, and any other information you'll need about your award. That is going to come to you as a PDF via Adobe Sign. That we made that transition last year, so you can just click into Adobe Sign, electronically sign these, and send it back to us very quickly. You'll need to register for a vendor number. We must pay out any funds, any grant funds from the Nevada Arts Council via direct deposit using this vendor number. And again, that's done online. That's a fairly easy process. You must send letters, thank you letters, to your state and federal elected officials to thank them for supporting the arts through the Nevada Arts Council. We have a really fantastic and easy option to do this through a website called Voter Voice, where you just put in your address, and then all of your state and federal elected officials will appear. You can select who you want to send that letter to, and that goes out very quickly. We do ask that you acknowledge the grant support. by posting the Nevada Arts Council and National Endowment for the Arts logos on your websites and all applicable grantee publicity and printed materials. Finally, for every grant, we do require that you submit a final report. This is done on the same online system that you'll apply with. We'll get a link to the final report once you have submitted your grant award paperwork. And then typically final reports are due within 45 days of the project completion or by June 30th, whichever is sooner. I do want to mention at this point that a slight change from the past. Last year, we changed to requiring documentation of the use of grant funds must be provided in the final report. So we are requiring receipts or any other of these acceptable documentation types with your final report this year. Okay. We have two types of grants. The grants can either be reviewed with a panel or an internal review process. Panel reviewed grants are reviewed and evaluated by panels of both in-state and out-of-state arts specialists, artists, and educators, depending on the type of grant. The panelists will score the grant applications based on the criteria listed in the guidelines, and then they'll make funding recommendations to the Nevada Arts Council Board. The Nevada Arts Council Board will be voting on those final grant allocations, and no grants are final until that board meeting. In the panel reviewed grants, they're typically quite competitive. Not all applications are funded, and the grant awards may vary from requested amounts depending on your score and the amount of available funding that fiscal year. The other type of review we have is an internal review. Some of you might be familiar. We had these grants in the past have been called rolling grants or non-competitive grants. For these grants, they'll be staff reviewed for eligibility, completeness, and adherence to the program requirements. These grants are awarded in the order in which they're received throughout the year while funds remain available. And these grants are contingent on available funding as approved by the Nevada Arts Council Board as well. And as we go through the different grant types in this presentation, I'll let you know which of these are panel reviewed or internal reviewed, and we'll talk about the deadlines for all of those. Okay. As promised, I'm going to do a very quick overview of our currently open grants. Usually at this time in the year, we don't have so many grants still open, but we were very lucky to receive additional funding this year from the National Endowment for the Arts through the American Rescue Plan. So we do have additional grant funds that are still available, and I recommend if your organization is eligible for any of these and you have not yet applied, I highly recommend applying for these, as we do have a fair amount of funding left over for this fiscal year. Our fiscal years run from July 1st to June 30th. So these grants I'm going to talk about right now are open from now until June 30th for activities and in that same time frame. The grants above the line are grants for individual artists, and the grants below the line are grants for organizations and public institutions. And I'm going to talk about these each very briefly right now. As we go through these, check out the chat. Tony just put a link to these current FY22 offerings that you can find on our website. First one we'll talk about is the American Rescue Plan grant for individual artists. This is a really great and rare opportunity. Again, we got that infusion of extra funds from the American Rescue Plan. So this is a project-based grant for individual artists. Usually these grants are paneled and very competitive, but again, because we received that additional funding, we are able to have an internally reviewed project grant for artists this year. This is awarded on a first come, first served basis. It is $1,000 flat just for an artist fee, and eligible projects are across all disciplines. These could include art exhibitions, performances, readings, concerts. And this one I want to highlight, it also can fund the creation of art. If you are a writer and you are writing a book and you have a very specific plan and project outline of activities that are going to take place between now and June, we can fund that creation of art. We funded some choreographers who were creating dance pieces. So this one is you can really think out of the box as far as what might be an eligible project. It doesn't necessarily have to be, an art exhibition or a specific performance. So if you had any questions on this, or if you want to know if your project might be eligible, please reach out to us via email. These are currently open for projects that occur from now to June 30th. Let's see, you must apply at least 30 days before the proposed project is going to start. And it's paid in 2 installments. The first installment of $500 is paid upon receipt of the signed grant paperwork, and then the final installment is paid upon approval of the final report. So you'll get that final $500 afterwards. Next, I'll briefly talk about the Arts Learning Express grant. This year, this grant is only open to individuals on our Artists in Schools and Communities roster. So if you are on that roster, you know who you are, and you're probably already familiar with this grant, so I'm not going to spend too much time on it. If you have any questions on this, you can reach out to Mary Jane Dorofechek, who is our Arts Learning Specialist. Okay, the last grant we have open for individual artists right now is the Folk Life Artist Grant. This is for individual folk artists and culture bearers, and these projects should focus on the transmission of folk arts. So looking at apprenticeships, mentorships, or small group learning activities. These are internally reviewed and go out throughout the year as well. If you are applying for any of our folk arts grants or our folk life grants, you'll be required to chat with our folk life program specialist, Rebecca Snetzler, before applying. And you can find her information on the website as well. Okay. We currently have our Arts Learning Project grant still open. In past years and in our next fiscal year as well, it will go back to being a competitive paneled grant. But this year it is internally reviewed to get those funds out to organizations quickly. It is $3,500 this year. And for all of our grants that require a match, we are accepting cash or in kind to alleviate the strain on organizations. These grant funds can only be used for the expenses listed here. And if you are a current operating support grantee, you can apply for this grant. This is a great opportunity. We have a lot of funding left in this one this year. So if you or your organization are planning an arts learning project between now and June, this is a really great opportunity. And if you have any questions, again, Mary Jane is your best bet to reach out. And her information is in the chat. Okay, last but not least, right now we also have the Folk Life Community Grant open. This is the sister grant to the Folk Life Artist Grant, but this one is for organizations that have annual budgets of $30,000 or less. Projects we've funded in the past through this grant include festivals, cultural events, concerts, gatherings, and conferences that bring traditional artists and cultural specialists and communities together. Right now, this is also internally reviewed and available on a first come, first served basis. And this one is up to $1,500 and no match is required. So these are going to be for projects that occur in our next fiscal year, which is July 1st, 2022 through June 30th of 2023. Again, grants that are below the line are for organizations or public institutions, and the grants that are above the line are our current offerings for individual artists. The one exception to that is the Arts Learning Express grant, which is open to artists that are on the teaching artist roster and also open to organizations. This is just the first round and the first announcement of our grants for FY23. We do anticipate adding additional grant opportunities later in the spring, and that includes the Artist Fellowship Grant. Those guidelines are still being worked on and reviewed, and those will be announced at a later date. Okay, start with our grants for individuals. Okay, project grant for artists. This grant we've had for a couple years now. This replaced what some of you might have known as the jackpot grants. These funds are divided into 2 different 6-month cycles throughout the year. This is a panel reviewed grant, so a panel will review these grants every 6 months and it will be awarding funds. One of the main changes that you'll see this year throughout all of our grants is that all of the grant amounts have been raised. This one used to be at $1,500 and now we've raised it to up to $3,000. And there is no match required for these grants, as with all of our grants for individuals. This again is a very broad grant. It can encompass many different disciplines, including art exhibitions, performances, readings, concerts. We've seen a lot of recording projects and filming projects come through the last couple of years. And again, the creation of art is eligible in this category. The funds must be used for relevant project expenses, and that can include artist fees to the applicant artist or any collaborating artists, facility costs, space rental, production costs. All of those are eligible costs. These open for the first cycle, which is activities that occur July 1st through December 31st of this year. Those grant applications open on April 4th and they're due on May 6th. We anticipate that that panel will likely be in June and those funds will be going out in July, right at the beginning of that grant period. Folk Life Artist Grant, very similar in nature to the Folk Life Artist Grant that we have open right now for FY22. The big change for FY23 is, again, that grant amount has been raised up to $3,000. And because it has been raised, now this will be a panel reviewed grant and will be a competitive grant. Other than that, very similar, looking at projects that focus on the transmission of folk arts and traditions. Okay, the Arts Learning Express grant. So again, very similar in scope to what we're looking at this year, but these funds are divided into 2 cycles for the next fiscal year. And that's so that we in the past, we've seen that if we don't divide the funds, that sometimes we'll run out of funding just in the first half of the year, and we're not able to fund any Arts Learning Express projects for the next half of the fiscal year. So we want to make sure that we're spreading the funding out throughout the year. This grant supports short-term teaching artist residencies, so 20 hours max. But beyond that, it can be very flexible grant. The shape and the schedule of the activity is really up to the sponsor and the artist. So it can be a shorter residency or go over a few weeks, 2 hours a week for 6 weeks. That can be a very flexible grant. This is internally reviewed and awarded on a first come, first served basis. The projects must occur within that 6-month cycle. Eligibility wise, the only individual teaching artists that can apply for this are, again, those artists that are on the roster currently. But this year, if you are an organization or a public institution, you can also apply for this grant and bring in a teaching artist to do an artist residency. If you are an organization or institution doing that, you may use an artist on the roster, but you may also bring in an artist that's not on the roster. There's just a couple extra items of support material that you'd need to add if you want to bring in an artist that's not currently on our teaching artist roster. And thank you, Tony. He just put a link in the chat for a little bit more information about our teaching artist roster. It's a really great resource. So check that out. And if you have any questions, you can reach out to Mary Jane on that. Now we're going to look at our grants for organizations and public institutions. Okay, our operating support grant. If you are a current operating support grantee, that means that you are an FY22-23 operating support grantee. You do not need to apply for this opportunity. This is a 1-year opportunity for arts organizations who are not currently operating support grantees. A little background on that. Typically, this is a 2-year grant for all grantees. This was last opened in 2019, and those grantees received the grant for 2 years for FY20 and 21. Right in the middle of that grant cycle was when the pandemic hit. And so in order to save those organizations' capacity while everyone was dealing with that, we elected to extend those 49 grantees into fiscal year 22 and 23. So if you are one of those 49 organizations that are currently part of this cohort, again, you don't need to apply for this. You'll just do your interim report as usual, and you'll be granted into FY23. However, because this grant hasn't been open in so long, we wanted to provide a 1-year opportunity for arts organizations, for arts nonprofits that are not currently receiving operating support funds from us to apply for it this year. All organizations will need to reapply for the standard 2-year grant cycle next year in fiscal year 2024. These funds support operating expenses, including administrative salaries, payroll, insurance, facility space, utilities. So this is not a project-based grant. This is general operating support. Organizations that apply for this grant must have a mission that describes arts as the primary purpose of the organization. So for the purposes of this grant, entities that are not eligible would be children's museums, science centers, public media organizations, preservation organizations, schools, libraries. So those folks would be looking at applying for our project grant, which I'll talk about next. This grant amount is up to $25,000 based on your gross annual total revenue as reported on your IRS 990 form. And you can see in this table here at the bottom what you can request between $5,000 and $25,000. You also must provide arts programming or services on an ongoing basis throughout the year. This grant is not focused on organizations who have a single event. So if you have a single festival, things like that, you would want to look at the project grant, which we'll talk about next. Okay, project grant. This supports the execution of one activity or project or a series of related activities. So we'd be looking at this for exhibitions, performances, readings, festivals. All of those would be eligible types of projects. They must occur between July 1st, 2022 and June 30th, 2023. And these funds can be used for fairly broad, relevant project expenses, but they cannot be used for any general operating support expenses, including staff salaries. And you also may not apply for this grant if you have an arts learning based project. That is going to go into our arts learning project grant, which I'll talk about next. This grant amount was also raised this year. It used to be at $5,000, now it is up to $7,000. And again, that match can be cash or in kind. Typically for in-kind matches, we see a lot of volunteer hours or facility space in there. This is open to public institutions and nonprofit organizations. And you do not need to be a specifically arts-based organization to apply for this. You can be any nonprofit that is doing an arts and culture-based project. This is a competitive and paneled grant. And the grant awards may vary from the requested amount based on those panel scores and available funding. If you are a current operating support grantee, you cannot apply for this grant. And the other thing I'll talk about is that nonprofits and public institutions this fiscal year may apply for either the project grant or the arts learning project grant, which I'll talk about right now. The arts learning project grant, again, this is $7,000, so the same amount as the project grant, cash or in-kind match. This supports specifically arts learning activities, teaching artist residencies, and teaching artist trainings. The grant funds are limited to these uses listed here. If you're using it for equipment relevant to the project, there's a $1,000 cap on that. This is again a paneled and competitive grant. The other thing I want to point out on this one is that this supports arts learning activities for grades pre-K through 12, but also for lifelong learning. So it is not just limited to youth arts learning activities. If you are a current operating support grantee, or if you are applying for the operating support grant, you can also apply for the arts learning project grant. And last, we have the Folk Life Community Grant. This is almost exactly the same from the Folk Life Community Grant we currently have open. The only change is that this grant amount was raised again to $3,000, up from $1,500. As a reminder, for this one, you would need to be a Nevada incorporated 501c3 organization with an annual budget of $30,000 or less. So this grant is really focused on those small community organizations. And if you have any questions on this, or if your project falls into our definition of folk or traditional arts, please reach out to Rebecca. Okay, how to apply. So you can read all of the grant guidelines and application questions on our website. One of the great new features we have this year is that usually we just had the guidelines and you'd have to wait till the applications opened to see all of the questions and all the support material, everything that's going to be required. This year, we created documents that have all of those application questions for you, so you can prepare and get everything in order before the applications open. Then all of our applications are only available online at our online application portal, which is through a website called Submittable. You do need to have an account to apply for those, but it's very easy to get one. It's just your first name, last name, email, and password. And then obviously you can contact us with any questions. I'm going to very briefly jump over and show you those websites. Okay, This is our beautiful Nevada Arts Council website. To find all of our grant information, you can go to grants up here at the top. And grant offerings, the dropdown will give you the FY22 or 23 grant programs. You can click on those, and then here are all the grants we discussed today. Again, you can see the guidelines and also the separate document with the application questions and support material that you're going to want to prepare for each of those. The other page that I've been talking about is this resources for grant applicants. This has a lot of great information, including all of this very important information about this unique entity ID. So this guide is really handy, the quick guide to getting a unique entity ID. That's going to walk you through it. It's got some screenshots and photos as well. It's very helpful. And then there's a really great video that the federal government created, again, to walk you through that step-by-step process. So that's a great place to start. And there's also a lot of other really great resources here, including an application submission guide, which walks you through how to apply using our submittable website. And once you're signed into submittable, this is what you're going to see. Something to note that all applications close at 5 p.m. on the deadline date. They are not open till midnight. So make sure that you're aware of that and not waiting until 11 o'clock at night, because you will not be able to access that application. You can see all of the grants that are currently open right down here. Click on guidelines to see the basic guidelines. And then once you click on apply, it'll take you right into the application itself. And it's all on one really nice scrolling screen. And it does auto save as you go. So everything is right here. If you have any questions once you are in submittable, feel free to reach out to us. Just a brief overview. These are the grants you can currently apply for right now for fiscal year 2022. If you're an individual, again, I'd highly recommend checking out that American Rescue Plan grant for individual artists. Nonprofit organizations, you can look at the Arts Learning Project grant or the Folk Life Community grant. And public institutions, you can check out that Arts Learning Project grant right now. Okay, and these are the grants you can apply for in fiscal year 2023 for all of those applicant types. Again, some of these are mutually exclusive, so if you have any questions on which you can apply for in conjunction with other grants, let us know. That Arts Learning Express grant is open to all organizations and public institutions, but it's only open to individuals who are on the Nevada Arts Council teaching artist roster. And we do have our Artist Fellowship grant coming out at a later date, so that's TBA for now. And nice big red bold reminder at the bottom there, to apply for any of these grants for nonprofit organizations or public institutions, you do need that UEI this year. Okay. One very brief last overview with our application dates. So the operating support grant opens first. That's going to open February 7th. So that's coming up. If you are an arts organization that is not currently receiving operating support funds from us, that's going to be open from February 7th to March 11th. If you are a non-arts based organization, you'll want to check out either the project grant for organizations or the Arts Learning Project grant, opening on February 21st and March 7th, respectively. And then if you're a nonprofit organization with an annual budget of $30,000 or less, and you have a folk or traditional arts project, check out that Folk Life Community grant opening on June 1st. The project grant for artists, that's opening up for the first cycle on April 4th. The next cycle opens in October. The Arts Learning Express grant, that opens on June 1st. That is that grant is open throughout the year. It's internally reviewed. And the Folk Life Artist grant opens next Monday. So that one's opening really soon. I hope that this helped with a brief overview. Like I said, we have a lot of grants that are opening in the next couple months, and we have a lot of grants that are currently open. So it's a really exciting time. There's a lot of funding that's available, and we want to be a resource to help you and your organization get as much of that funding as possible, especially after the last couple of years. Thank you so much, and have a great day.